A retired school principal sat in the parking lot of a Salvation Army in Decatur, Georgia, for 22 minutes before she went inside. She had driven past it 3 times. She knew the woman working the intake desk. They had graduated from the same teachers' college in 1989. She went in anyway, because there was no other choice left. That was the morning after Cornelius Hatch had her evicted from the house she had lived in for 31 years. The house her late husband Reginald had painted butter yellow every spring because he said yellow was the color of people who intended to stay. Cornelius Hatch was 61 years old, the president of Hatch Capital Group, a private equity firm headquartered in a glass tower on Peachtree Street that reflected clouds and nothing else. He had made his first million at 34 flipping distressed commercial properties in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. He had made his second and third millions doing the same thing after every other disaster that followed. Floods, factory closures, municipal bankruptcies. He was very good at arriving just after everything fell apart and leaving just before anyone could hold him responsible. His firm had acquired the Birchwood Estates development in DeKalb County 14 months ago. 47 single-family homes, mostly occupied by retirees, teachers, county workers. People who had lived there long enough to stop reading their lease agreements because nothing had ever changed. People who trusted that staying was enough. The eviction notices went out on a Tuesday. Cornelius had been in Napa Valley that week at a conference on sustainable investment. He did not sign the notices himself. That was what attorneys were for. Winifred Osiapaya had taught English literature at Fairfield High School for 26 years and served as principal for 11 after that. She had counseled students through grief and addiction and teenage pregnancy and the particular kind of despair that comes from growing up poor in a country that tells you poverty is a personal failure. She had written 847 college recommendation letters in her career. She had kept count because each one felt like sending a small piece of herself out into the world and hoping it landed somewhere soft. She retired at 62 with a pension that covered her mortgage, her utilities, her medications for blood pressure and arthritis, and not much else. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a 178,000 miles on it and a crack in the passenger side mirror she had covered with electrical tape. She owned a good winter coat, a set of dishes that had been a wedding gift, and approximately 400 books that she had never once considered getting rid of. Not during the lean years, not during the illness years, not now. The eviction notice gave her 60 days. Her attorney, a kind young woman named Priscilla, who worked at a legal aid nonprofit and was clearly doing 6 jobs at once, told her the lease termination was legal. The timeline was aggressive but within code, and that fighting it would cost more than Winifred had. So, at 64 years old, a woman who had spent 4 decades teaching other people's children how to find meaning in difficult sentences found herself loading her books into cardboard boxes that she got for free from the liquor store on Memorial Drive. She could not fit all of them. She left behind a box of paperback mysteries, 2 volumes of Toni Morrison she owned duplicates of, and a water-damaged copy of Giovanni's Room that had belonged to Reginald and still had his handwriting in the margins. She stood in the empty living room for a long time looking at that box. Then she picked up Giovanni's Room and put it in her purse. The rest she left. The intake coordinator at the Salvation Army was a woman named Beverly, who had known Winifred since 1989 and pretended not to recognize her with such graceful professionalism that Winifred wanted to weep. Beverly processed her paperwork without commentary, showed her to a shared room on the 2nd floor, pointed out the bathroom schedule, and said dinner was at 6. Winifred sat on the edge of her assigned cot, her purse in her lap, her good winter coat folded on top of her suitcase. The woman in the bed across from her was watching something on a phone with cracked screen and earbuds that had lost one cushion. 2 beds down, a young woman with a toddler was braiding the child's hair with the focused patience of someone who had learned to find stillness wherever she could. Winifred opened Giovanni's Room. She read 3 pages without absorbing a single word. Then she closed it and sat in the particular silence of a woman who has been strong for so long she has forgotten what it feels like to be anything else. Cornelius Hatch did not know Winifred Osiapaya existed. He knew the property. He knew the projected return on the redevelopment. He knew the square footage and the zoning variants and the timeline for breaking ground on what would become the Birchwood Collection, luxury townhomes, starting at $619,000. He did not know the name of anyone who had lived there. He employed people specifically so he would not need to. What he did know, intimately and without comfort, was that his daughter had not spoken to him in 11 months. Her name was Tamsin Hatch. She was 32, a pediatric occupational therapist who worked at a clinic in Inman Park and drove a bicycle to work regardless of the weather, and had inherited her mother's eyes and her mother's way of going completely still when she was angry, like a lake before a storm. Her mother, Lorraine, had divorced Cornelius when Tamsin was 16. She had said very quietly that she was tired of loving a man who treated human beings like line items. Cornelius had not understood what that meant for many years. He was beginning to understand it now. The last real conversation he and Tamsin had was at Thanksgiving 11 months ago. She had asked him about the Birchwood acquisition. He had described it the way he described all of his acquisitions: returns, timelines, market positioning. She had asked what was going to happen to the people who lived there. He had said that was not his department. She had set down her fork, folded her napkin with careful precision the way Lorraine used to, and said, "Dad, I love you. I don't know how to keep doing this." She had left before dessert. He had not called. He told himself he was giving her space. He knew he was afraid. It was a Sunday in March when Cornelius walked past the corner of Commerce Drive and 2nd Street in Decatur and saw the woman selling books from a folding table on the sidewalk. He had walked this route 3 Sundays in a row. His cardiologist had told him to get 45 minutes of low-impact movement per day. After the stress test results in January came back with a flag on them. He walked because the alternative was thinking about the flag, and about Tamsin, and about the fact that his penthouse on the 23rd floor of a building he partly owned was the quietest place he had ever been in his life. The table held maybe 60 books, arranged in careful rows by subject: fiction, history, poetry. A small hand-lettered cardboard sign read, $2 each, 3 for $5. The woman sitting behind the table in a folding lawn chair wore a green cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and an expression of complete composure that Cornelius found briefly disorienting. She was reading. She looked like a woman waiting for a bus that she was not worried about missing. He stopped because of the books. He had not bought a physical book in years. He consumed everything on a tablet efficiently, usually while on a treadmill. But one spine caught him, a worn paperback of Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, the A.G. and Walker Evans. His mother had kept a copy on her nightstand in the house in East Point where he grew up. He had not thought about that book in 30 years. "How much for this one?" The woman looked up over her glasses. $2, she said. "Same as everything else." He paid. She wrapped it in a piece of newspaper, the way a bakery wraps a single pastry, and handed it to him. He walked 2 blocks, turned around, and came back. "Do you do this every Sunday?" She considered him briefly with the particular assessment of a woman who has spent decades evaluating whether a person in front of her is worth her attention. "When there's weather for it. Where do the books come from?" A pause. "I had more than I could keep." He did not press. He said thank you and walked away again. But he thought about the sentence for the rest of the day. More than I could keep. The following Sunday he came back. She was there. He bought 2 books he did not need, a biography of Thurgood Marshall and a collection of Lucille Clifton poems. He asked her name. "Winifred," she said. "Most people say Winnie. I prefer Winifred." He told her his name. She nodded. Did not react to it the way people in his professional circle reacted to it, with a quick recalibration, a slight brightening of interest. She simply nodded, as though Cornelius was a perfectly ordinary name belonging to a perfectly ordinary man, which she had not yet decided he deserved to be. He came back the third Sunday and the fourth. He learned things in pieces, the way you learn things from someone who has no particular reason to tell you anything. She had been a principal. She had taught English. She had been at Fairfield for 37 years total and had only left because her knees made standing all day impractical. She had a daughter-in-law named Petra who sent her groceries sometimes when she could. She had a grandson named August who called her every Thursday from his dorm at Howard University and told her about his philosophy professor with a seriousness that made her feel hopeful about the world. He learned she was living at the Salvation Army shelter on Commerce Drive. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without apology, without the particular brace that people put in their voice when they expect to be pitied. I lost my housing in January. I'm on a waiting list for a Section 8 unit. In the meantime, I sell books on Sundays, and I substitute teach when the county calls me, which is most weeks because apparently good substitutes are hard to come by. She looked at him over her glasses. I'm managing. Cornelius went home and stood in his living room for a long time. The living room was 100 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the skyline he had once been proud of, a sectional sofa he had purchased based on a photograph and never sat on comfortably, a kitchen he used to make coffee in the morning and nothing else. He had a chef who came on Thursdays. He ate at restaurants the other nights alone, at corners tables where the lighting was good enough to read a report. He opened his laptop. He searched. Birchwood Estates Decatur eviction. He found the local news article from January, 47 households displaced. Average tenancy, 9 years. Several residents over 60. The article quoted an advocacy group. It did not quote Hatch Capital. He searched Winifred Osiapaya. He found her retirement announcement in the Fairfield High School newsletter from 2022. A photograph. She was standing in a hallway lined with student artwork, laughing at something someone had just said, one hand raised as though she was mid-sentence. The caption called her a cornerstone of the Fairfield community. He sat very still for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and did not call Tamsin because he didn't know yet what he would say. He sat with it in his hand until the screen went dark. He came back the next Sunday. He didn't buy a book. He sat on the bench near her table and he told her who he was. Not just his name. What he did, what Hatch Capital had done. He said it plainly, without the softening language he used in board meetings, without the framing of market forces and fiduciary responsibility that made everything sound like weather rather than choice. He said, "My company bought the property you lived in. My company sent you the eviction notice. I didn't know your name, and I didn't ask." Winifred was quiet for a long time. A man walked past with a dog. A car with a broken muffler rattled by. A child on a scooter navigated around the end of her book table without breaking stride. "I know," she said finally. "You knew? I looked you up after the second Sunday." She straightened a row of books that didn't need straightening. "Cornelius Hatch isn't a common name. Why didn't you say anything?" She looked at him with an expression that was not unkind but left no room for softness. "Because it wasn't my job to make you feel bad about it. You already knew. You just hadn't said it out loud yet." He opened his mouth, closed it. The correctness of what she had said pressed against him like a hand on the chest. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. It came out less transactional than he meant it. More like a man standing at the edge of something and genuinely not knowing which way to step. "I don't want anything from you," Winifred said. "I'm not interested in charity that makes you feel better. I'm on a waiting list. I substitute teach. My grandson calls on Thursdays. I still have my books." She paused. "Well, most of them." There was something in that last sentence, a compression. The thing left unsaid was heavier than everything she had said. He left. He drove home. He called his attorney. Then he called a different attorney, one who worked in tenant advocacy, a referral from a contact he trusted. He called a property manager he knew in Decatur who ran affordable senior housing. He called Tamsin. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Dad." Not warm, not cold. Careful. "I need to tell you something." He stood at the window with the skyline he had once been proud of. I think I've been confusing being good at business with being a good person. And I think I've been doing it for a long time. Silence. That's not news, Tamsin said quietly. I know. Why are you telling me now? Because I met someone who didn't yell at me and didn't sue me and didn't ask for anything, and somehow that was worse. Another silence, different from the first, softer at the edges. Who? He told her about Winifred. He told her about the book table, the green cardigan, the $2. The way she had looked at him when he said her building was not his department, though he hadn't known yet that was what she was remembering. He told her about sitting on the bench and saying out loud what he had done. Tamsin didn't speak for a while. Dad, she finally said, what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet. Whatever, she'll let me. She sounds like she won't let you much. No, he said. She won't. He heard something that might have been almost a laugh. Okay, Tamsin said. Call me after. He did not call the next day, because Winifred had said she didn't want charity and he believed her. What he did instead was make phone calls that were not about Winifred directly. He called the director of a teacher housing nonprofit in Atlanta that he had donated to twice without ever learning what they actually did. He had a conversation that lasted 90 minutes. He learned what they actually did. He called the county housing authority to understand the Section 8 waitlist timeline. He was told 11 months on average for someone in Winifred's bracket. He called his attorney again. What followed was a series of conversations he could not have predicted having 6 weeks ago. About whether Hatch Capital bore any responsibility for relocation assistance. About what responsible development looked like before the demolition phase rather than after. About what it would cost to provide transitional housing stipends for every displaced Birchwood resident over 60. His CFO sent him a one-line email that said, "Are you okay?" He replied, "Working on it." 3 weeks later, on a Sunday in April, he walked to the corner of Commerce Drive and 2nd Street. The book table was there. Winifred was there in the green cardigan with a coffee thermos beside her chair. He did not bring paperwork. He did not bring a check. He brought nothing except himself and the news that the 12 residents of Birchwood Estates over the age of 60 would receive 18 months of transitional housing assistance from Hatch Capital beginning the following month. Not as charity, as a legal settlement. Something she could hold in her hand and take to an attorney without it disappearing. He said, "You can refuse it. You have every right to. But I want you to talk to someone who isn't me before you decide." Winifred took off her reading glasses. She looked at him for a long moment. "Sit down," she said, and gestured at the bench. He sat. She poured him coffee from her thermos without asking if he wanted any. He took it. It was very strong and slightly sweet, the way his mother had made it in the house in East Point. "This doesn't fix what happened," Winifred said. "No. And I don't owe you forgiveness." "No, you don't. But my grandson, August, is coming home for spring break in 2 weeks, and I would like to have a kitchen for him to eat breakfast in." She looked at the books on her table. "I would like to have a place for my books." Cornelius nodded. He didn't speak. "Tell me about the other 11 people," she said. He told her. She listened the way she had listened to students for 37 years, completely, without preparing her response while he was still talking. When he finished, she asked 3 specific questions about the timeline, about what happened if a resident needed longer than 18 months, about whether there was any language in the settlement that required them to be grateful about it. He answered all 3. The last one, she already knew the answer to. She had asked it to see what he would say. She picked up her coffee thermos and looked at it. "My husband Reginald," she said, "used to say that some people spend their whole lives building walls and call it progress." She looked at the table of books. He was not wrong, but he also said that sometimes a wall is just a wall, and the man who built it is just a man who didn't know yet what he wanted to build instead. Cornelius looked at the sidewalk. "He sounds like he was a wise man," he said. "He was a high school custodian who read everything he could get his hands on and argued with me about Faulkner every Sunday morning over eggs." She smiled, and it was the first time he had seen her smile, And it changed her face in a way that made the Sunday morning feel less like a transaction and more like a beginning. He was the wisest man I ever knew. A week later, Winifred moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a building in East Decatur, 3 blocks from a public library branch and a 10-minute drive from August's bus stop. The apartment had good windows and enough wall space for 400 books, though she only had 300 left to fill them with. She had already requested 3 interlibrary loans and had a list of used bookstores she planned to visit when she had weekends free again. Cornelius did not help her move. She had not asked him to, and he understood that help offered without being invited was still a form of taking up space. What he did was send August a message through a mutual contact, a brief introduction, and the address of a used bookstore in Little 5 Points that had a good poetry section, because Tamsin had told him that was the right kind of gesture, and he had decided to start listening to Tamsin. August called his grandmother on a Thursday, as he always did, and told her about the message and the bookstore. Winifred was quiet on the phone for a moment. "Did you go?" she asked. "Not yet. But I thought maybe we could go when I come home for break." "I would like that," she said. She was sitting in her new apartment when she said it. Her books were on the shelves, not all of them but most of them, arranged the way she had always arranged them, not alphabetically, not by color the way people did now for photographs, but by the order in which she had first loved them. Giovanni's room was on the end of the second shelf, Reginald's handwriting still visible in the margins when you held it at an angle to the light. The kitchen window faced east. In the morning, it filled with sun. Tamsin visited her father for the first time in 11 months on a Saturday in May. She brought her bicycle up in the elevator because she did not trust building bike racks, a thing Cornelius found both impractical and deeply characteristic. She stood in his living room and looked at the sectional sofa and the skyline and the kitchen that smelled only of coffee. "You should get a plant," she said. "I travel a lot." "Then you should travel less." She sat down on the sectional. "Tell me about the teacher." He made coffee the way his mother had made it, strong and slightly sweet, and sat across from his daughter in his own living room and told her everything. About the book table. About Let Us Now Praise Famous Men. About sitting on a bench in Decatur and saying out loud the thing he had been not saying for 26 years of acquisitions and redevelopments and conference calls and quarterly returns. Tamsin listened the way Lorraine used to listen, completely. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to do this again?" she asked. "The settlement, the housing. Are you going to do it again when the next property comes up?" He had known she would ask this. He had been thinking about it for weeks. "I don't know yet what it looks like," he said, "but I want it to look like something." Tamsin turned her coffee cup in her hands. Outside, the city held its usual noise, traffic, birds, the distant percussion of a city that never stopped entirely. "Then figure it out," she said. "I'll help." He looked at his daughter, Lorraine's eyes, Lorraine's stillness, and somewhere underneath it, something that was entirely her own, the part that had chosen occupational therapy and a bicycle and a clinic in Inman Park and 11 months of silence that had cost her something too. He understood, sitting there, that she had not stayed away to punish him. She had stayed away because she could not keep watching and could not stop caring and had needed to find a way to do both. "I missed you," he said. It came out plainly, without the armoring he usually put around vulnerable sentences. "I know," she said. "I missed you too." She stayed for 3 hours. When she left, she wheeled her bicycle into the elevator and turned around to face him in the hallway. She looked at him the way she had not looked at him in a long time, directly, without bracing. "Dad," she said. "Yeah, get a plant. I'm serious. Something that needs actual water." The elevator door closed. He stood in the hallway for a while, then went back inside. He ordered a fiddle leaf fig online that afternoon. He was told it required consistent indirect light and careful watering and would die if overwatered or underwatered or placed in a draft. He read the care instructions twice. He found a spot by the east-facing window where the light came in at an angle in the morning. He watered it on schedule. He did not overwater it. He moved it once, when the light shifted in June, and moved it back when that turned out to be worse. It lived, slowly, then with more confidence, the way living things do when you pay consistent, unglamorous attention to what they actually need, rather than what you assume they want. On a Thursday in June, Winifred Osiapaya was sitting in her apartment grading substitute work she had agreed to review for a colleague when her phone rang. August, calling from Howard, right on schedule. He told her about his philosophy professor. He told her about a paper he was writing on ethical obligation and proximity, whether we owe more to people we can see than to people we cannot. He asked what she thought. She put down her red pen. She thought about a parking lot in January. She thought about a book table on a Sunday. She thought about a man who had sat on a bench and said the hard thing out loud and meant it, which she had decided, slowly and without sentimentality, was rarer than it should be. "I think," she said, "that proximity doesn't create obligation. It just removes the excuse of distance." She looked at her bookshelves, at the window full of morning light, at the apartment that had begun to smell like her own life again. "But I think what matters more is what you do when the distance is removed, when you can't pretend anymore that you didn't know." August was quiet on the other end, writing something down. She could hear his pen. "That's good, Grandma," he said. "Can I use that?" "You can," she said. "But cite your sources." He laughed. She laughed. Outside her window, Decatur was loud and ordinary and alive. The way places are when people have decided to stay in them, to tend to them, to be present in them, not because they are beautiful, but because they are theirs. Some people spend a lifetime treating the world as a spreadsheet and only discover too late that the columns they forgot to fill in were the ones that mattered. Others pour themselves out so completely in service of strangers that they have nothing left when the wind turns. The people worth watching are the ones who find each other in the rubble of their separate losses, not to rescue each other, but to sit down on the same bench, drink strong coffee, and begin the slower work of figuring out what to build next.